everybody. Welcome back. Next up, we've got Sean Allen, who's going to be going through 10 not so obvious ways to improve your launch. As always, if you got questions, pop them in chat. We'll get to them at the end of the talk. But with that, floor is yours, Sean.
Thank you. Hi, thanks for coming. And so this is a interesting talk that I help a lot of folks with, and so I hope that this helps people. Okay, so who am I, right? So I've been in the industry for a long time. I've worked on, big AAA games. It's always kind of funny to say that your first game shipped is GTA 4 and worked at Major League Baseball. I worked on tiny indie games. I worked on, a game jam game that actually got picked up by Kotaku, and then a bunch of indie games, the Church and Beatdown City. I've worked on music tracks. I've worked on a lot of things. And so over these years, the biggest thing I've learned is, the importance of shipping. I actually learned most of my stuff at Major League Baseball because I became I was an indie at the time, but I also got that job, and then I became a producer. So then I learned a lot about how to ship things, even when you are trying, you're the creative on the game, but you also have to cut to get the game out, because that's just the reality at the end of the day. So yeah, that's AAA, worked on a lot of these games. I got to see them from behind closed doors and see the changes that had to make it to get the game out. You also saw, what happens when those games ship and, they're not all buttoned up. But with a company like Rockstar, you have the reputation that even if you have, flying horses at launch, then people will still, play your game. Working on mobile and VR was very interesting because, we worked on mobile games and people are very, I picked up Home Run Derby on mobile as a game that I was 3 years in. And, mobile reviews, VR reviews, all those things could be really brutal to a project picking up steam. And so our goal with the mobile game was to keep our rating up and to work very hard to make sure that the game, all the different shipping we had to ship, a yearly update plus, tons of updates over the year. And that was just super informative because it was the last big update we did was right before COVID hit, and we weren't going to have marketing support if we went for opening day, which was when our goal was. And we decided, we should do it a month before, because we might not be able to get all the features out, but we'll get the game out. And then funny enough, then COVID hit and we wouldn't have support anyway. So it was actually very smart to do it a month early. Then we've got, indie games. And these games are, in 2020, I released Treasure Beatdown City about 2 months after releasing that year's Home Run Derby mobile game. And so I had to do that during, the beginning of COVID. We thankfully got into cert in February of that year. And, had I not, there were just certain things like my programmer was like, should we upgrade Unity? And we upgraded Unity, saw all the red notifications. They were like, no, we're not going to do this. We'll just ask for waivers when we ship. Then 3 years later, we put out Beatdown City, the Ultra Remix update, which was this massive thing that tripled the size of the game. And we had to make a bigger team. And over that time, we had to pick and choose what features we needed. That some things I thought were very important, as long as they weren't going to hold up shipping. And then we also, that same year, put out the You in Trouble. It was a prologue on Steam, and it was kind of like a little fun thing to do. We did that partially to be able to just make a demo for the game, and because we thought that was very important. And it basically took all of the new features with minimal art updates to become the demo that you need. And last year we started working on Beatdown City Survivors, which, in this climate of pitching, we were pitching other things, we weren't really getting anything. And then Beatdown City Survivors we made a demo. We we got a prototype in a couple of weeks. We made a demo that could be sent to people within 3 months, and then we got picked up for some funding. So, and part of why that was because we were told that this demo was something that the person could play for 4 hours before they had to delete it off their computer, which just kind of shows like the importance of if you're going to ship your demo to pitching, then you need to make sure you have something that, you know, looks good enough, looks final enough that you're going to have. I also help others ship quite often. I've helped run, you know, groups for marginalized game developers for a long time. I've been the sounding board for a lot of people. Currently, I'm helping on the leadership of Black Voices in Gaming, where we have our Discord and we sit there and we say, hey, like, when are you coming out? What are your metrics looking like? Like, what do you need? I often take time and sit down with devs and say, hey, look, when you ship your game, it's probably, no matter what you have in your head, it's not going to be that. Even if it's positive, if it's super positive, it's super negative. Just, you know, I want to be here for you if you need help to get through it. And this is huge because this has inspired me to give this talk, because I feel like you got a lot of people in limbo with their games. You got people who just hit the launch, and they're like, oh, I don't have X, Y, and Z that needed to be in this game, and that tanked the game, and then, you know, it just didn't do anything. And so this is kind of my conversation with people. I say, hey, you want this, right? You want a successful game launch. And they say, and I'm like, you know, it's really hard to ship, right? They're like, yeah, I know. And give them some very baseline stuff to help you launch, which is this talk. They say that makes sense. And they launch without any of it. And they're like, oh, it was out of my control. And it's super frustrating because you're just like, you only have one launch, really, right? So this is the real title. Your game may be done, but it probably isn't finished. Like, it's and these are things that to look at that will help you with getting your game like finished. So this talk is not about marketing. It's not about because I'm assuming you know these things, right? Like general QA, you know, bugs. There's going to be some highlighting of certain types of bugs, but like general bugs, like that's on you. And, you know, game design balance, that's also on you. These are things that I think most people know, but, you know. So this is the outline. So we'll be going over first time player experience, overall presentation, art and visual quality, audio, and things related to it. Talk about text, usability best practices, general unpleasantness, bigger technical hiccups, progression killers, and the secret 10th option. So you got to stay to the end. So the goal for this is I want people to think about when your game comes out, what is a person's, you know, like, because especially with Steam, your game could be refunded, right? If they load it up and it just doesn't load, then they're like, okay, well, I just want my money back, right? So you got to think about what's the first impression of a game, what's the first minute, like the minute to minute after that, the first hour, the first 2 hours, and then generally the overall lasting impression. Because, you know, how you begin and how you end, often, you know, a lot of people aren't going to finish your game. So the beginning of that game is really important to people sharing, reviewing, telling their friends about it. And this is here to help you. First time player experience. So first off, like, just, I'm not going to retread any of this stuff, but this is a talk. You know, there's a QR code. You can also just look up GDC. My mom, Plants vs. Zombies. I watch this talk all the time. This talk talks about very specific things about how the lead on the team, how he got his mom to play Plants vs. Zombies, which, you know, it's challenging because getting people who don't typically play games to play games just requires you to, you know, like get past certain things that we take for granted. And the amount of times I share this with people and then they bring back their tutorial that, like, I'm not saying you have to follow every single thing the guy says. I am saying that he actually gives some like straight up, this is like scientifically proven, and people ignore it. I've ignored it, right? Like, so it's like we're not, but this is why it's important, I think, to watch this talk, rewatch it. I rewatch it every time I do a tutorial. Certain things to really pay attention to. The sunflower dilemma, 1 sentence versus 4 sentences. Basically, it's kind of the difference between saying, "Hi, this is Plants vs. Zombies. Let me give you a paragraph of text," versus place this thing on the map. Because, that's just how you get in the game, right? Like, you don't have time for people don't want to read your paragraph. They just want to start playing the game. I think it's very important. Also, you want to simplify complexity. Like, even if you have a complex game, you have to figure out, like, a lot of people talk about just don't say anything, don't write anything, don't have any words. And like the thing, like 1 sentence versus 4 sentences, that is basically saying don't put like 4 sentences at a time, but it's not saying don't speak to what your game is. Making Treacher and Beatdown City, it was a turn-based, hybrid turn-based real-time beat 'em up RPG, which required some explaining of things. And I know that it doesn't require explaining every last thing, but the tutorials that I would do in the beginning would try to explain every last thing, and I would realize people would walk away from the tutorial learning almost nothing. The things that they learned were the things that we had them do, but the extra text that if we bombard them in the beginning, they wouldn't remember any of it. And actually what we ended up having to do was simplify the complexity of our tutorial and roll it out over time. When we did the Ultra Remix update, because I watched so many people like stream the original game and just not really understand how to play the game, even though they like the game. And so that was a big wake-up call for me. And when you're doing your first, a lot of people say like, oh, I don't have time to do a tutorial. I need to pay for new art. I need to do X, Y, and Z. I can't do that because our budget's out. And I'm like, no. What you need to do, what we did is when we made our tutorial, I did make new art. I made these gym backgrounds. There was 3 backgrounds I had to make, and then a top-down map. But I used this character, and I wanted to introduce these characters. So the systems that are all here, that's all the UI that you use. And I had this idea. I was like, it'd be funny if we could get like this personality trait to make the character really annoying and bombastic, kind of like Scott Steiner. And so we tried to make a memorable intro where people are like, ha, that's funny. Like, people coming through, start reading that. So, we wrote text that we wanted people to be interested in, but we mostly used all the systems that we had. We just broke them down for people to play the game. And, I think I could have done this with the typical art. It's just, because I was the artist and I knew that it wasn't going to take me too much time, I was able to make it. But if you just have all the art you have, just make a small little dungeon or whatever using everything you have. Just rewrite text and break down your gameplay. Also, context sensitivity. Like, this is a good talk. You can find a lot of talks about this, but I went through a few and I like this one. It basically, talking about how context sensitivity, that's the way that you can do your tutorial later. And I'm dealing with a lot of this just because it's super important. It's one of the most important things. Like, what we ended up putting in was just reminding people about the game mechanics, especially if they weren't using them. That's something so that players who are trying your game out, that they don't get frustrated and leave like within the first 20, 30, 40 minutes, because by that point they should pretty much figure it out, especially again if it's a more complicated game. Presentation. So thinking about this, think about what happens as soon as your game boots up. There's a lot of different ways to have that first screen look. How busy is your title menu? These things can just hit people with certain, feelings that this is an unserious endeavor. Does your game have weird clashing styles? I'm probably gonna, one thing, it's like, think about this. Like, when you start your game and you have press start to start, press any key, right? When you press, there's a reason why I think Xbox specifically, requires you to have a press A to start button at the beginning of the game, because oftentimes you'll start a menu and it'll say like start, and you won't, like, if someone's on keyboard also and doesn't have the a controller, even if you recommend a controller, there will be people on keyboard that will not know how. If we use E for confirm a lot of times, and that is not clear to people in their brains. It's clear to us. So we have to put like a press button to start, and then it would, so that it would change based on what the player's using. And that's just one of those things where they're like, wait, I can't even get in the game. I'd have people like tell me that they pressed every keyboard. I'm like, whoops, I didn't introduce this, and that's my bad. And I'm picking on this game just because it's so huge, and it's a game I love personally. I love Vampire Survivors, but like within communities like award judging, right? Like people thought Vampire Survivors was this ugly game, and it hurt the overall initial. Like I played this game when it first came out, and it hurt a lot of initial reactions. It's you're lucky. They're lucky that people go past these things, like go past just straight up pulling out like Bayonetta art, right? Like, and got past that and said, oh, let's play this game, because that doesn't happen to everybody. There are people who literally, there are YouTube videos that are like, this person used this X thing, this is why this game is not good, blah blah blah. And it's like, thinking about your UI, thinking about all these things, and like this UI only got more complicated as the game got bigger. And yeah, it's I still wish they would change the screen. Personally, it still just makes the game feel messy to me, even though I go to it a lot. So thinking about art, visual quality, things to think about, like, when you're putting out your game, double checking the texture and art resolutions. Resolving those low texture resolutions can come in multiple ways. There's the oh, this stuff was imported into Unity at the wrong resolution, right? Like some people might be importing it at 512, some people might be importing it at 1024. They might not be communicating. It might not be something written down anywhere. And then you might see some art that's blurry versus some art that's super crisp. And it might not be super noticeable. There could also be the issue that the artists delivered your art in different resolutions. Like if you're making a card game and you have this nice big piece of key art for each piece of card, for each card, that some people don't give you, like a 4K 300 DPI like file that would be good for printing, that you then adjust for the game, obviously. But so then, like, if they give you, like, I don't know, a 1024 by 1024 piece of art, and that's just not going to fly in a PC game, right? Like, it's going to look differently, and it's going to be rendered differently. And I've had people come to me who say, oh, well, the artist has moved on, and, we didn't stipulate that. And I think something that if you're working with, like, freelancers or anybody, make sure that you have in your contract that, like, they have to deliver like game ready assets, because you might not notice. Like you might just be working on the game, this and that, and you get the file. You're like, okay, cool, let's put the file in the game. And because you're running a small team, you're busy, and then you get to the point where the game's about to come out, or the game is out already. And like I've seen this in games that I really like, and I came to the developer and they were like, yeah, well, there's nothing we could do. And I think there should be something you could do. You should be able to at least be able to ring them up and be like, hey, can you export this bigger? Or figure out a way to export it, up-res it, and make it cleaner. Yeah, this is one of those things. Like when importing mismatches, I've had this issue where it's just general team general carelessness, where folks are just bringing it in. They all have their own way of doing it. There is no agreed upon way of doing it. And it happened to me when we went from one person to four people, although we actually looked back at some of the art done by one person, and they were brought in at different levels, and they were just like pixel art things. But there was a time where some people brought some stuff in at the wrong thing, and then when we up-resed it to 4K or whatever, it just looked really weird. And they were bringing things in at the wrong resolution because they saw certain files brought in at the wrong resolution when it was a smaller team. So sound, important thing in games. Things you need to pay attention to with this: audio mixing, audio spikes from gameplay, audio looping, and audio repetition in general. So one thing. So in this clip, all right. So in that clip, you can hear the music, but you also hear this, and this was a DS game, a game that I love tremendously, Radiant Historia. But with my friends, this is a really old game. We were all like, "What is wrong with the sound? What is wrong with the steps?" And this was not just us who noticed this. Like GameFAQs noticed this. This was written like, "Should you buy the game?" Like because of the footsteps being so loud. And that was in a time where you couldn't update the game. And but when they did update the game for 3DS, they did decrease the sound quite a lot. But I'm curious to know, like, how those footsteps got through to the end of production and onto a cartridge without anyone like putting on headphones and saying, what is wrong with these sound effects? Like, they are too loud. Or maybe someone was like, oh, no one's gonna, like, they won't use headphones, but like that was a big thing. The music was so beautiful that you wanted to use headphones, but those sound effects just made it unbearable. So one thing, audio spikes, right? Like, do you want to hear like what an audio spike sounds like? Well, actually, this is just an image. Not gonna mess with you because it's really unpleasant. Actually, no one wants to hear this. Like, so this is what happens when you have like an attack, right? Like you have a enemy gets hurt attack, and the enemy, like the sound plays twice at the same time, or 3 times, or 5 times, or 100 times because you're hitting X amount of enemies simultaneously. You need to make sure that that's not happening. And that was like really bad in Treachery Beat Down City, where we had this like 8-bit style sound effect, and it was just like get into your ear and would be like, what is going on here? So yeah, like no one wants to hear that. You also, just to that end, you can look up how to resolve those things. Same thing with like repetition. There's a way to get the game to modulate the sound up and down to change the way that each sound, like your sword slash, so it doesn't always sound exactly the same. Those are all things you just do go on YouTube for. I recommend doing it. Like, I'm not a super technical person, but these are discussions that I've had. So for text, have you double checked your script for typos? That's always a very important thing at the end of the game. In your writing heavy game, does your text have juice? Like, and does it not always hit? Like, does it not always happen? Can you skip writing and still understand the game? And can you speed up, slow down text? Like, these things, I think the first and the last things here are the most important, because they're the ones that the first will just make people wonder how much attention was paid. And I feel like, as the person who wrote a very text heavy game, who, I don't know, for some reason I like hoard really threw me off. Like I'd be like, yeah, I know what I'm spelling here, and I just wouldn't think about it, and then it would make it into the game incorrectly. And it took several updates for us to finally be like, okay, this script is fine. And it can be really hard to dig through, but those things turn me off. And it's, again, I'm not saying it's easy to remember, but I do think taking your, like, have someone else play the game so that they'll see it is important. And speeding up, slowing down text, like, people just get really upset if the text takes a long time to go. Like, if it's like one speed, people just like can you just let me hit the button to go through? And to one end is, if you have a story heavy game that also has stuff outside the story in terms of gameplay, people should be able to take away and have like an interesting time with the game without all the text, because they will skip it. It's kind of funny that I've seen also people who say, I like your game, I love it, blah, blah, blah. I skip all the cutscenes though. And I'm like, well, what? But, and then they get held up when we make an unskippable cutscene. Like there's like an unskippable cutscene after the first 5 levels because it was a lead into the rest of the game. And people were like, wait, what was this about? And that's where I got complaints. And I was just like, I mean, maybe read the game, but you can't control what people do. And also, does your localized text fit? Because especially with like very pixel, like font heavy games, like we were using like Player 1 or Player 2, whatever, and it was like a big monotype. Like, no, things just did not fit half the time, and it took having to like reconfigure a lot of stuff to get it to fit, and it just looks really weird. Like German like puts 3 words together that have spaces, and then it creates all this other like stuff. So then there are ways to program in ways to make sure it adds in the right dash at the right time for things like that. Like Chinese, Japanese, you don't want to be making your own spaces. You definitely want to make sure that you don't want it to be like going to the next line but then making the words mean nothing. And this is mostly just like for when folks boot up your game, they want to, in another language that's not English, you want to make sure that they understand the game. So usability and player expectations. Things to think about. Can you access the settings before starting a game? It's very important. I did not do this when I launched Treachery Beatdown City. I forget why. There was like a reason in game. And that's really annoying because like if the game launches too small or full screen and you want it to be windowed, or it launches with loud audio and you want to lower that audio or anything, that's like terrible, right? Like it feels awful when you just load the game, it goes full screen, loud music over a video, and you can't do anything other than alt tab out of the game. It's just like, well, I don't know if I want to keep playing that at this point. Does the back button increment one sub menu at a time? Like these, I don't know, these are little things that I don't bother me. Like if you're like in the one menu and you hit back and you just go all the way back to the beginning, that's something that's going to bother people using your options specifically. Does your game support changing resolutions in game? Like that's super important for people. And does whatever button do what players expect it to do? I think it's fine to think about, like, if you have a game that's an open world game where you're going to be stealing cars, if you decide to not make Y the button that steals the cars, you have to have a real reason why, because otherwise people are going to be very confused. I dealt with this fighting, like, I was building a game using Nintendo controls, and in a world where we've gone through the whole the whole Tower Babylon thing, where now all of a sudden B is A and A is B, for whatever reason. And I had my own reasons, because we were also like first and foremost really launching on Switch and PC, but like PC folks were all like always hitting the wrong buttons. And so then we ended up having to put in a toggle that was just like these control type A, control type B, where A is select and B. And we also made them default to the thing that we thought people would most want based on platform, because I was fighting against this for so long and it just was not helping me. So here's a good QR code. I realized after this, like Bitly changed all their things, so there might be like a interstitial, but if you click through that, this is a settings checklist that there was a guy on Twitter, I forgot, a long time ago, who asked all these questions, and I decided to put them into a checklist that has all these things, and you can add things to it, you can subtract things from it, and it'll have a little 66 of 66 thing over here, and it'll tell you all the things that you're trying to check and validate for yourself. Because I think it's important to go through a list and say, like, you might even say, oh, whoa, I never even thought about this, or I never thought about that, because again, settings are just important to players, right? Yeah, and games controls can come down to designers' personal preferences, right? Like I said before, but if you decide to break that paradigm, you need to know why you're doing it. Like, but people might be upset anyway. Things I've learned: 1610 is very common and will mess up your whole game's UI if you don't plan for it, which happened to us. Even though I have 1610 stuff. Plus, some players love ultra wide and expect you to plan for it. We're seeing these memes right now because of this handheld. But also, like, the bottom idea is actually the best solution for a game like that. Like, you don't want the game to be stretched wide, right? Like, you want it to still exist properly on the screen. If in the case that someone loads up this or their monitor, right? Like, it's more likely going to be their monitor. But I had to watch my game get ripped to shreds where the game was here and the UI was pulled to the edges, because that's what you do is you might want to pin them to the edges. And that was really unideal to watch a player stream the game like that. So, just kind of general unpleasantness. Think about, like, what are things about your game that you play or work around instead of fixing or improving, right? Like, you like, I can't tell you what these things are, but what annoys you about your game? Like, do you go in and is there a weird double tap of a button you have to do because the game is ignoring the first tap or something? Do you go in and, like, does your option menu kick you all the way back and you're just like, well, that's fine, I'll just go back in to fix this thing? But like, those things, if you are noticing them, people who play your game will notice them like 10 times stronger. They'll see it and they'll just be like, why didn't the devs think about this? And I know you were thinking about this, and it might not seem necessary to fix, but definitely put that on your cards. Put those cards up. Try to get them done before the game comes out, because they probably are easy fixes, like, quote unquote easy, right? They shouldn't, if you've built your game properly, they shouldn't be the hugest lift, right? Like, the going back or doing X, Y, and Z. Also, some platforms require the back button incrementing 1 to actually do that. Now we get into technical hiccups. So these are forgivable, but will hurt player impression of your game most likely. Inconsistent frame rate, visual effect fidelity varying. That comes down to, like, the art pipeline from before. What I've seen is, like, games that have, like, explosion effects that, like, some of them are pixelated, some of them are extra blurred because whatever texture was brought in was at a different level than the other textures. And so, yeah, you're playing this game and, like, some shining light around like, there'll be a high resolution, like, sprite of a sword, and then the other thing is, like, blurred for some reason, and it's because it was just brought in wrong. And you might not have noticed this, but, like, I can guarantee you people notice this. Poor collision and jank, unless your game's Flappy Bird or one of these games that focuses heavily on that. That's why I say probably, because you might have a game where these things are actually features and not bugs. And sound cutting out occasionally, like you're playing the game and just everything falls apart and you're like, what's going on? Pieces fall apart. Like, people will notice these things, but they're not game killers. Also, like, just to keep in mind that if you're doing porting, you need to be on this for the ports. Like, if you have a publisher and the publisher says, okay, we're going to externally get these ports done, you still need to have final say on build quality, because I've seen games that have gone to the storefront that the developer was like, oh, we didn't get to see that before it hit the store, and the publisher will most likely not understand your game as best as you do. And they might, again, and I've seen even porting companies that have been difficult and like, I don't know, ignore things or say, oh, this is fine. And, for you, it might not be fine. And for the publisher, it might be fine. So, you should be able to get this build. And that might require you writing it into your contract to get access to some sort of dev kits, even on a loan, that you can check out these things for yourself or get someone to live stream it for you so that you can watch the game get played. I know working with porting partners myself, like someone was saying, yeah, everything's fine. I'll stream it for you. And I was like, no, let me play it. And when I played it on my setup, it was missing some sort of files that the programmer had. So I was missing like the port basically. And if they would have streamed it to me, I would have greenlit something that actually didn't work. So, it's important. Now, progression killers. You should also be able to check this out, but these will kill your game. If your build doesn't load at launch, like I had to turn down games for a conference because I would double click on the executable and it just wouldn't launch. And the developer would say, well, I don't know, it works for me. And I'm just like, well, if it doesn't work for me, it probably doesn't work for most people. And it also could be like some weird like Windows thing that's just like holding up it, or an Apple like thing. Like I know I've heard a lot of people say Treachery Dusty, even though we checked it on the Mac, we did all these things on the Mac, but we haven't necessarily checked it on the newer versions that people just were having the hardest time getting it to run. And thankfully people message me typically on that front. But if you launch with that, like right now our game's like $3 when it's on sale, so people I think are a lot more forgiving, and I think they're more forgiving when they're on Mac because they're like, well, they know that there's going to be shenanigans there. But at launch, no, like refund it immediately, move on to the next thing, right? Constant crashes and soft locks, no. And basically anything that kills progression, right? Like save data and corruption and deletion also. Like you need to make sure that you have like some sort of backup file for your saves, because that will just ruin everything for people. They will not want to come back to your game. I was playing a game where I started up the game one day and it was like, hey, hi, nice to meet you. And I was like, yo, I got like 40 hours on this thing. I don't know. And thankfully they had a folder that had backups. And I went to one of the backups and I found it. And it turned out to be the most recent one. I dragged it in. Boom. We were good. But I don't know if I would have wanted to start over again. And this is a game that I loved. I've been playing for a long time. And it doesn't matter to me at this point, but then you go and you change your Steam review from like, I love this game to, this game deletes saves like 40 hours in. Don't bother, right? Like, I don't want to be that person, but like I'll send people a save, but again, like that makes your life miserable if you have to do all that especially on like a just launched game. Yeah. People lose their progress, your game's dead in the water. Yeah, definitely check your build launcher on multiple computers, multiple OSs, build in redundant backup saves. So number 10, I know I said this talk isn't about marketing. It's not really about marketing, but please launch your game with intent. Because you do all this work and your launch won't be worth anything without, like, you only have one chance. This stuff may seem like very trivial, but I've seen, and then there's also other best practices like for storefronts, or like putting your release date on the right date and not letting that date slip, not letting not getting into new and upcoming and not being ready to release, because once you pull yourself out of that, you've lost that space forever. So all these like little tiny things towards making your game run, I feel like you need to put that level of focus into your game launch as well. choosing days, choosing listening to what happens when your game launches. What happens when your trailer launches? Do you have logos all over, despite the fact that Derek Liu and a bunch of other people have been, mentioning, hey, don't do that. Why are you doing that? And I get it. You might be doing it for purpose or whatever, but, maybe listen to like best practices on these things, because you only got like 10 to 20 seconds to get people invested in your trailer, right? Like, you want to just, I don't know, it's like, is it worth fighting against common best practices for something that is pretty trivial, right? Like, and that can hurt your launch. I've dealt with a few launches myself this year with games that I'm helping out with. I just want to talk about this like briefly. These two games, Advent Neon and Kind Folks, they're excellent games. I think everybody should check them out. They came out around the same time, and Advent Neon, like the developer, spent a lot of time and listening to a lot of things about how to promote a Kickstarter, how to do X, how to do Y, how to hit social media. Has been very diligent about, trying to collect review scores for Steam, because that's something that, you can ignore. You could just be like, I don't really care about trying to get review scores, but those are important, right? Like, so, that's a best practice, right? And that game did pretty well. And Kind Folks, there was a lot that happened at that launch. It ended up in new and upcoming. It wasn't ready to be out yet. It has like 2 review scores. And I don't think it did super well. And I haven't talked to the dev, and I think part of it is he kind of disappeared after it launched, and I feel terrible because it's an amazing game. We tried to help it with a lot of placement in events, and just ultimately, I feel like fumbling the intro can, like, to getting it out into the market, that just can kill the game as well. So I want to say thank you. And just, you always got to protect your neck. Like, that's the thing. Like, just keep one eye open.
I think a lot of game development can be helped with wise words from Wu-Tang. All right, so I want to ask a question before we get into everybody else's questions.
Yeah.
And, the Con Folks is a perfect example. It's a good stepping off point. One of the things that I don't think developers prepare themselves a lot for is the psychological aspect of shipping. And, it's one of those things where you've put a lot of months or years into something and you release it and people say bad shit about it, and it gets very personal. And so is there a way to prepare yourself, as you've seen these launches, from GTA all the way through the indie stuff, to be ready for maybe learning the hard way that your game isn't as great as you thought it was?
That brings me back, just because, like with like, I remember not really, like, we never really got like a so feedback, like, because I worked on trailers primarily, so like putting those out, everybody was like, oh my god, can't wait. But then when we had The Lost and Damned, which was like the Xbox exclusive DLC, which then came out to PlayStation later, as we all know it will, but people were mad. This was the first time I've seen somebody mad about something I'd been working on, where they were down thumbing and like upset and blah blah. And I was kind of like, I was a little like, whoa, but also I'm like, at the end of the day, I think we're going to be fine. So it's very different in like that AAA zone where you're like a little removed. Like, it's not my money. Although we're seeing right now that ship a great game, ship a bad game, everybody gets laid off anyway. But with the indie side, a lot of folks have said like, ignore when it's out, this and that, blah blah blah. I had to manage my whole launch in March 2020, put it out. I fumbled all of these things. This is kind of why I'm speaking to it also, because I had to learn, and I try to explain it as I I think I messed up the Steam button like release. I thought I had released it and I had it. And like Kickstarter people are like, why is the game not coming up? And I'm like, what? And it was like, oh, because like I pressed something but didn't push it live. Yeah, like that time, I don't know. It's I feel like stepping away for a bit is good. But also be like, yo, give yourself a week to focus on the launch of your game. I will say it's hard. Like I'm from New York, so I take everything personally, but really try not to take things personally. Like it's and I know it can be hard because especially with marginalized game creators, like I'm working with some devs right now where you're seeing people getting really angry about benign things existing. And um I don't know. Like I've also had people pull guns on me in like real life, so I'm like not worried about anybody on the internet. But like I honestly say, like you need to like be like think of this person as just an avatar that they're shouting into the void as something they're mad, etc. Try to just if you can find somebody to help you, like shut down like harmful discourse and this and that. Like if people are just being aggressive on Steam forums, don't like get someone or just be like, you know what, click block whatever. I started in the industry on IGN's moderation team on their board, so I saw 7 years of some of the wildest stuff. But it's like at some point you just have to say like, all right, yeah. But that's also the other thing is like, yeah, your game might not be what you think it is. That hits with reviews a lot. That hits with online stuff. I say steady yourself.
No, yeah.
That's why I say brace for impact, because that's why I tell people like no matter what, because also if your game is really positively accepted, it might be selling at a point where you'll be running into a lot of bugs and all of a sudden like you still need to like breathe and say, okay, I'm not gonna try to hot fix, because then you could actually be hurting other people if you're creating new bugs and stuff. It's one way or another, you kind of have to come and try to do a measured response to everything.
I think one of the key parts of that is, like you said, don't we joked 15, 20 years ago, don't read the reviews. For God's sakes, whatever you do, don't read the reviews. But having someone else that trust, somebody on the team or somebody that's like 2 steps away from it, have them curate the feedback that's worth relaying, not just every single "you suck, now I'm going to come burn down your house" comment that's on there.
Yeah.
So question from Sith MQ. Sean, this info is great. How would you recommend setting up a sort of quote shipping checklist for someone who does not have experience shipping a game?
I think that's that's another that's still something else I probably should work on. We had one internally at MLB where it was like, loaded it up on, because we were making games for iOS and Android, and you have to make sure that the build runs fine on both in order to do that. You could take the one that I make, I think, and look at a lot of the stuff that's in here and build it yourself. I think that would be a good thing for like the next time we're shipping, to put something together, because that's one of the key problems in games is, right, it's like people don't often have time to build out like a checklist or something.
I mean, hell, nothing else. You can start with ChatGPT. That thing is actually good for some stuff. So our own Tom says, were there any design challenges that forced you to rethink the direction of the game mid-development?
Well, yeah, like in the last year, I've had to rethink of many things for pitching stuff, but for Treasure Beatdown City, that was actually one of the things. Like so we had an interesting contract thing where we were with PlayStation Mobile, which doesn't exist anymore, and existed for a very short amount of time, and we were trying to deliver this really big thing, and that somebody just told me, just ship something, like ship something, make it like $1, and that'll fulfill your contract, and then you can move on. And that ended up leading then the whole PlayStation Mobile thing got absolved, like taken away, and I had to then get the game out. And I think at the end of 2014 we did a Kickstarter, and then I was still like, how are we going to deliver all of this at the end of 2014? I like that year had gone by so quickly, and I was just like, you know what, we need to cut this whole game down, which is why we did our update, because like we were like, you know what, we're going to make sure that the first third of this game feels like a game, like it has a beginning, a middle, and an end, and we're going to ship that. And that was one of those, like, I don't know how I can ship all of this, but I do know how we can ship this because we have all these maps done. We just need to now work. And again, that took another 5 years through, running out of money, going and get jobs, blah, 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 like to get just all those enemies and all that stuff done. That can just show like cutting a game in a third and trying just to ship that can take you time. So I think, that's always the thing everyone says is like, try to deliver the base amount of what you need to do. And that's a big thing for shipping, because some people say, I want to make 90 of something. And I'm like, is anyone going to see 90 of it? Is anyone going to see 10 of it? Because like, especially if you're trying to pitch something, don't make 90 of something. Make 10, make 20, because you want to make sure that the initial pitch gets people interested, not necessarily like you don't have to give the final count of cards or whatever, because the people playing your pitch thing shouldn't even be seeing that many cards.
So any tips on how to handle a launch that's already getting review bombed, since that trend is going on with a lot of gamers right now?
That's a little outside of this. If it's for like reasons like settings and things like that, I would say collect the stuff and look at what. But if it's for like ideological reasons, I don't know. Like it's one of the harmful things going on.
What are you talking about, Sean? There's like absolutely none of that going on. It's
I'm thankful to, I do not know how I flew under the radar, because like we would occasionally get like I made a dark comedy game where you fight like racist and fascist cops, and this even got highlighted by the LA Times. Like they wrote a whole article about it, and in 2020, and like somehow in the last couple of years we just started getting, is this game woke? And again, like when I got that message, I just like, I just banned the person, remove it, because I'm like, this is clearly not a good faith argument. But if it's for something real and tangible, then you can try to address
it. So if you've got a checklist and you've got all the run through, this is what you should do. This is, have you heard about using something? I mean, not something like, but using Itch.io as a like test launch to get out, and then before you actually launch full on Steam?
For full game, I mean, I would say, yeah, do your like, I mean, you could do that, but also just do like a play test, right? Like you do that with Steam. You could do a play test with the whole game even, and play tests. If you do a play test, or demo, right? Like those things are like, Itch is okay, but Itch doesn't really get the traffic for many people that I think they would need. I think doing a, like, yeah, get people to play through your game, do a beta test, do whatever. Like that's how, my business partners are playing a demo for Beatdown City Survivors and sent me a bunch of stuff, and the one that's on Steam, and I'm like, yeah, we're fixing a lot of stuff. We haven't pushed an update to it, but like I got like a couple of things from that. I got some things from PAX also, like bringing it to events, getting people like watching them, watching them play it in front of you and sitting there and letting them figure it out. That's also super helpful. But yeah, that's
I mean, so PAX brings up another good question. Do you feel that it's worth the cost of, showcasing at one of these live events for indie devs to do that, or is it better to wait until you've got a much more stable budget going on before you start spending that kind of money?
I think you should be close to launch before you start showing your thing, like at like PAX, because you also get a finite amount of, you don't want to. there's PAX Rising, which I just did, and PAX Rising is free. It still takes time and effort and a lot of energy, but you can only get into that like once or twice, right? So like you really want to do, but I think everyone is in places where you can do local events, and doing like the small local event is like, I think, very invaluable. Like we got to go, Kickstarter was doing an event in their building, and so we got to show the game there. We showed it like NYU Game Center, a few places, and that's where I got to see like what were real issues versus what were made up issues, because sometimes live players will actually make up new problems that aren't actually real, like because they just for some reason can't remember the controls to your game, and then that's, I don't know, it's
Well, thank you. I mean, this has been fantastic. I absolutely truly appreciate it, Sean, because this is a lot of the stuff that folks don't really, like you said, they're not obvious solutions for all of this. Anything you want to plug before we go?
I mean, we got Beatdown City Survivors demo on Steam right now. If folks want to play it, give us feedback. We're going to be updating that. We're going to be doing something for Next Fest probably. Okay. So, but we're also going to be setting up a playtest for that, like for the later levels. I don't know. But yeah, it was really cool to be at PAX and see all the folks like either struggle, or, you know, it taught me, oh, I need to maybe, like, we have an auto battle button, and people with some reason just that would be the first thing they would press. They would turn off the auto battling and be like, why can't I battle? And I'm like, because you keep pressing that button. And they kept pressing it on and off, on and off. And I'm like, we need to put like a visual cue that says you have turned off or turned on this thing, because people are sitting there very confused. And you know, and truthfully, I understand.
All right, we'll be back in just a few minutes with our next talk. And remember, if you want to get copies of all these decks, it doesn't cost anything, but you do need to go to the Eventbrite page and actually get a free ticket so we know where to send it. But with that, we'll see you all at the next one. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.